All right. So I think first and foremost, Ray, well, I know there's going to be more people joining us, but first and foremost, you and I met, I want to say it was probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, close to 4 years ago.
Um, and we were introduced by our very good friend, Dave Watson, who is in Seoul, South Korea right now, working for Coupang.
Hmm.
And so tell us a little bit, tell the folks that are joining us a little bit about your background, and we'll get into what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go backwards. I'm at Whole Foods currently, but before joining Whole Foods, I spent 10 years at Walmart at the corporate headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. Had a great career. Started in communications in kind of internal marketing, and worked my way in through working for the chief ethics officer, and then for the chief diversity officer, and then ultimately for kind of the head of recruiting, and then for the chief HR officer. And so through all of that, it really was around how do I continually connect ideas, people, and technology to create kind of solutions for the organization. Through that, I really found my love when I joined in recruiting. I got into recruiting by owning the employer brand and recruitment marketing strategy for Walmart, for taking on implementing the applicant tracking system. But really, it was about how do I help these people being candidates, find jobs that they're passionate about that are going to better their lives. It was, for me, recruiting was the marketing part of HR. And I started in internal communications and marketing and have a real passion for that. And so got into a leadership role relatively early in my career, led a large organization at Walmart, and was quite happy. Spent 10 years there. I felt like I built, legacy work that was going to live on beyond me. And had no intentions of ever leaving. I was actually really happy there. My wife and I have 2 kids, and we were raising our kids in a community that we really loved, with friends that we really cared about, and coworkers that I really enjoyed working with. So I had no intention of ever leaving Walmart. And then about 4 years ago, Whole Foods had reached out and said, hey, we just want to get to know you. I say Whole Foods. Andres on my team had reached out and said, hey, we just want to get to know you. We're not looking to hire anyone right now, but your background seems interesting. And so through kind of what I would call kind of this back and forth dating process with Whole Foods, for about 6 weeks, I finally got connected with the head of HR at Whole Foods, who ultimately asked me if I was interested in building out the talent acquisition function, recruiting function at Whole Foods. The company had been around for a long time, but never really had a large focus on recruiting, because the company has a great brand and candidates wanted to work at Whole Foods. They still want to work at Whole Foods. And so this was about recognizing that times have changed, that the landscape has changed, and that we can do a lot more to be proactive in how we own the recruiting process and relationship with candidates and relationship with hiring leaders. So about 4 years ago, I told my wife about the opportunity. She's like, are you crazy? Are you kidding me that we're going to move from, Arkansas, where we love and where we have, family and we're well rooted, to Austin, Texas. And she went to bed mad at me, but the next day she woke up and she's like, I just feel like we're supposed to do it. And that was almost 4 years ago. When I first joined, there was a team of 5 or 6 individuals. We're now a team of just over 50 in recruiting, taking a more proactive stance on recruiting, going out and finding talent for the organization, talent that's going to help us grow and be more innovative, talent that's going to help drive the business forward. And it's been fun. Like that's what I could say about this organization's caring. It's mission driven. It's full of purpose. And so for us to be able to help connect great talent with these purpose driven, life changing opportunities is something that I get a ton of fulfillment and personal joy out of. And so, been here almost 4 years. That's the work that I'm doing. Started my professional career. I did some consulting before going into Walmart. 10 years at Walmart, and been here for just about 4 years.
Nice.
Going on 4 years.
Nice. So you were there before Amazon purchased Whole Foods.
I had no idea that Amazon was going to purchase Whole Foods, but it really has been a great journey since the acquisition by Amazon.
Right. So that's interesting. I mean, one of the things that you said there, Ray, was, the branding that you had to do at Walmart versus, coming into Whole Foods, and they didn't really have, a true recruiting department set up, because their name recognition and the brand and everything like that seemed to have been, maybe I misinterpreted this or I'm reading too much into it, but They didn't feel like they needed something that was, a reach out. Did they feel as though the name recognition and branding would bring people to them versus having to go out and get them?
Yeah, I don't think that the company didn't do anything. And we did have a recruiting team. It was small and for the size of the organization, certainly not what it should have been probably. But that point, like the organization was pretty self-sufficient. Hiring leaders did a lot on their own with the support of a few recruiters and a few individuals within our HR organization, which we call team member services. So there were a few folks in team member services who absolutely supported leaders. So there was work that was being done, but this was an intentional shift to say, hey, we need to invest in talent acquisition. We want to be more competitive. We want to go find talent rather than just wait for talent to come to us. I think there's this balance of, yes, we want people to come to us, and yes, we need to go find talent as well. So there really is this and strategy rather than one or the other.
Gotcha. Okay. So number one, I really appreciate you joining us today on Banding Together. I mean, this is awesome to have you and your expertise here. We started Banding Together, and actually one of the friends who started this with me is a participant. I see Sean Plowman helped me put this together probably 10 weeks ago. I would say close to 10 weeks ago we started these. And really the main mission, which I know you are a mission-driven guy, is to help those who are out there looking for new opportunities. And one of the things that we get asked very often is there's, 100 applicants, there's 70 applicants, there's however many applicants. How do I make myself stand out from all of those people who are putting their resumes in front of those hiring managers or those recruiters? And I know you have some, gold nuggets of information to share with people. But I want to kick it off, and I want to, encourage the participants, please, please, please ask questions, go into the Q&A area or the chat area and ask any questions that you have for Ray. But one of the first ones I wanted to ask you came up a few weeks ago in one of our Banding Together conversations, which was around confidence. We were talking about how, it's a lot of people have a hard time being confident right now. They've been laid off for the very first time in their life. They've never had to look for a job in their life. They've said, I've always moved from one job to the next, and it's always been very fluid.
Yeah.
So now we're faced with this either complete lack or complete ego, or this confidence as way too off the charts. How do people strike a balance? I mean, what is your recommendation for people doing that?
Yeah, so I definitely think it is a balance, right? Early in my career, I had a mentor who gave me a piece of advice that said, confidence and humility is a double-sided coin, and you have to be able to balance those. We definitely want a person, as a leader, I want a person on my team who's going to be confident, who's going to be able to own their role and own the work that they're going to do. At the same time, I don't want a person who's arrogant, right? And so that's where it is this balance of confidence and humility. You should be humble in your strengths and what you can do, but confident that you can do it. So how does that come across in the process of applying for a job or speaking to a hiring leader? I do think it probably depends on the individual and the person. But even stepping back, times are crazy right now. The current state that we're living through is something that many of us have never lived through or never experienced before in our life. So for that individual who is out of work right now, Alan, I just would say to them, like, you are good enough. You have what it takes. Like, maybe times have been tough on you, but certainly don't give up. And the conversation and the advice that I always give to my friends, or like even remind myself as I've been through the process, if I go through a process and I don't get the job, it doesn't mean that I'm not good enough. It means that it wasn't the right fit for me. And so for that person who has gone through the process, maybe even over and over, that just wasn't the right opportunity for you, but you still are good enough and you still have what it takes. And so I think the way that maybe shows up in a conversation is being able to articulate what it is that you've done, what it is that you've accomplished, but not in a boastful way. So much of it isn't what you say, it's how you say it, right? Like, it's something that we're all taught probably pretty early in our lives. And so, yes, in that conversation, or if you get to the point of having a conversation with a hiring leader or a recruiter, I do think it's important that you are confident in what you've done and what you're capable of doing, but not doing it in a way that comes across as as boastful. Like no one is looking for that person. What I do like to look for is a person who can demonstrate like they have overcome obstacles in their life. It's this grit that sometimes is hard to maybe put on paper, but easier to speak about, right? Easier to speak through like maybe obstacles that you've had to overcome, but how you've been successful in spite of those obstacles in your life. I think that's one way to be able to talk about that. But it definitely is a balance between be confident, but also be humble.
Right. Now, when you say overcoming obstacles in their life, and we talked about this last week, actually, do you want people to focus solely on professional obstacles, or if they bring up a personal obstacle that they overcame, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah. So for sure, there are things that we just don't want to talk about in the hiring process, right? Like partly because if you're a candidate and you bring up certain topics, the recruiter or the hiring leader isn't going to be able to engage on those topics because you face breaking law, right? And so we want to make sure that we're not really talking about kids or pregnancy or anything that could potentially come across. Like, so if you're a candidate, I wouldn't go there. For me, like I've had my own obstacles in my life that I've had to overcome. And it's not one of those things where I ever dwell on my past, but how I've used that to propel me forward. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, Alan, the only one that graduated high school. I was fortunate to have mentors who believed in me and encouraged me and pushed me. And then I was able to go on to get my undergrad and my MBA as well. But I don't ever focus or leave it there. I don't ever leave it about the hand that I was dealt, but what did I do with that hand? Yeah. And so for a person who can use obstacles like that, I do think it's an opportunity to then differentiate yourself as a candidate, to show that you are, that you have grit, that you're scrappy, that you're willing to, do whatever it takes. In some ways, like I think that's relevant to the conversation of the job search process.
Yeah. Now it's interesting because I saw an article last week that talked about when you are, going into that where you have to boast about yourself, where they say, tell me something that makes you stand out among the pack, or whatever the question that might lead to, you having to be a little bit boastful about yourself, that you should focus on you and not your team. And I kind of took a little bit of I don't know that I agree with that necessarily. I think you can bring in your team and still look, confident and not arrogant. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think leaving your team?
I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting. I've been a part of many interview processes where the candidate will answer a question like describe a situation when, and the person will always speak to we did this, we did that. And as an interviewer and as a part of a panel, it was always hard to identify what did that individual do versus what did their team do. And so I do think there's this balance, Alan, my perspective of what is it that, when you speak to that, why should we hire you, et cetera, you should speak to something you're proud of, right? An accomplishment that you're proud of. And maybe it was something that was part of a bigger team, but you should also talk about the role that you played on that team. And I think a lot of candidates go wrong by leaving out the role that they've played and really focusing on the broader we, rather than the collective. And that person's a part of the collective and they had a role to play in that collective.
I like that. Yeah, I think one way to ask that question is what do you personally want to hang your hat on, as you exit that environment, or what is one thing that you look back and say, yeah, that was me. I did that. That's
I think that's great.
So the next question we get all the time is on follow-up. So people will apply and they apply to however many jobs they apply to a day. What is the proper form of follow-up? I mean, what should people be doing? I mean, how do you advise your crew of 50 people, to stay close with the people that are reaching out to them, but also at what point is the candidate follow-up a little too pushy, a little too much, and all right, we get it, and now we're done with you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that even lead into the follow-up. It's really important. It's critical that a person is finding the right match before they're applying for a role. One of the challenges that our team faces is that we do have a lot of candidates who want to work for Whole Foods, and so they apply for everything. And you can apply for any job that you want, absolutely. But for the recruiter and for the hiring leader, it is important that they see a fit that there's an alignment between your background, your experience, your education with the role. When there's not that alignment, it's going to be challenging. So I would say there's a couple things you need to do before you follow up. You should absolutely make sure that it's the right job for you, that it's the right experience. And then recognizing that things may not always be as quick as you would hope as a candidate. And part of it is, you talked about volume before, right? A person applying to a job, they're likely one of many, 70, 100, in some cases more than that, applicants. And so it's not going to be an overnight response typically.
Yeah.
Our recruiters they're vetting candidates every day. They're going through, they're reviewing resumes. They're also at the same time, they have the key skill set that the hiring leader is looking for. They have the job description they're going after, and then they know the intangibles that the hiring leader is looking for as well. And so they're trying to balance reviewing all of those aspects of this search against all of the resumes, which there can be a couple hundred at times, as well as going out and looking for candidates at the same time. So that response doesn't always happen immediately. You should absolutely follow up. And so that could look like a couple of different things. And what typically gets me the most is when a candidate does their homework. They understand the team perhaps that this position sits on within an organization. They go out. There's lots of ways of doing it, but LinkedIn, sending messages, potentially sending a message to a recruiter, finding a person who sits in that organization. So if you know it's on the marketing team, perhaps the position's a marketing role, and then they start trying to connect and network with people in the marketing department, they're able to then start doing some informal networking as well. And then, that's in LinkedIn. I have people who figure out who I am. They're scrappy in that way. They figure out who I am and they email me at my Whole Foods email address. I will tell you that gets my attention a little bit more, right? It shows that they're resourceful. It shows that they're smart and that they're able to figure this out. They're able to decipher maybe what my email address would be. And then they send me a note, and typically in that, when they're able to make a direct link and a direct connection between their skills and their experiences with the role and why they're passionate about joining Whole Foods or the value that they can add into the organization in that role, I am way more likely to send that email and their resume to the hiring manager. Way more likely. I can also tell you that just today, we're not even in the office. Most of us work remote, but just today, these are all the follow-up letters that I got from candidates who are interested in Whole Foods. So is that the most effective way? I mean, it's, we've always heard like write a follow-up note, and I'm not saying don't do that. But a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are doing that. The other thing that I've seen that I would just say don't do. You should never try to buy your way into a position. We work for a grocery store. Like that's what Whole Foods is. And the number of times that candidates have sent gifts here to our office, trying to entice our team to, get them in front of the hiring manager, that just never goes well because it comes across as you're trying to persuade us or influence us with whatever it is that you're sending. I mean, we've had people send in gift bags with all kinds of different things from the store, right? Spice, energy drinks, all these things. And with a letter, it's like, you should come after me because I'm high energy. That's the energy drink play.
Right.
I've got spice and pizzazz. That was the spice play. I'm like, okay, interesting and clever, but maybe not the best way
Right.
of getting hired. And that person didn't get hired.
A little schmarmy. I don't know if that's the word, but that's the word I'm going to use. What about, so what would the balance of those emails be? How much do you want them to talk about Whole Foods and what they know about Whole Foods versus how much they should talk about themselves? Because that's also something that, is important to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely know the company. This is even before applying to a job. I would do my research, know the company, know the structure. There's plenty of it out there, right? On our own careers website, on Glassdoor. There's enough information that you can get. If you're a candidate, researching a company, you can go out and find this information. So I would certainly show the cultural connection between you as an individual and the company and why that resonates with you, why that inspires you. For a lot of our candidates, they're really drawn to Whole Foods because of conscious capitalism. which was a concept that John Mackey, our founder, was very key on, right? And helped co-author a book on that. So there are a lot of people who are drawn to Whole Foods because of our philosophy around how do we help not just our team members, but our suppliers, the communities that we serve, the greater world, the things that we're doing in quality standards. And I think the more that people make a connection to the company and to themselves and why that resonates with them, like why that energizes them, I think that helps them actually stand out. In terms of cadence or frequency of communication, I think 1 to 2 communications is probably enough. You want to follow up, you want to be thorough, but you don't want to, and I think it's okay to be a polite pest. You definitely don't want to come across as annoying or desperate. And I say that because I have been a part of as a leader, hiring people on my own team, I've been a part of a number of interviews where the person came across as very desperate, and that never goes well in an interview. And I can understand like a
desperation.
And I can certainly understand like a person needing the job, right? Like they've got bills to pay. They have a family to feed perhaps, but there has to be a way of how do you not come across as desperate in that job? Because I think when you're desperate, it actually does something against your confidence in regardless of the outcome of this process, you still knowing that you're good enough and that you have what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I tell people all the time, call me before you go in an interview. You know, if you're feeling like you're in desperate or your confidence is shot, call me for a quick boost, because you don't show up well when you're desperate. You just don't. So we have a question from the attendees here, and I encourage everybody, please go into the Q&A function, please. What would you say are the top 3 soft skills, which I've heard described differently lately, and I can't remember how, or personality character traits that you and Whole Foods look for in an ideal candidate?
So I don't know that I can speak broadly for Whole Foods. I'll speak for myself though, if that's okay. So good communication, absolutely. I think that's critical in any role that you play in the organization, any role in any organization. You have to be able to communicate well. I want a person who's ambitious on my team. They need to show me that they're hungry, like that they have what it takes, that they're going to be a go-getter, that they're a self-starter. That notion of being ambitious is super important for me. And then a person who's innovative. What is that out-of-the-box way of thinking? Even if you're not going into a role where you need to be an innovator, there's always opportunity for innovation. And so I want that person who's going to think differently, who's going to help us look at the problems that we need to solve differently, like look at them through a different lens, help us come up with ways of looking at this that is from a different perspective. So those are a few of the ways. I also love a person who's proactive. I want you to demonstrate to me that you're not going to be told what to do or how to do it, but that you're going to have the initiative, but also be proactive. Building relationships is key. Demonstrating being able to build a foundation of trust is also critical. Those are definitely some of the soft skills.
Okay. You didn't mention transparency, but I know you well enough to know that that's probably in all of those too.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious because, you know, it certainly comes up in an interview. So we're talking about, you know, kind of the whole process of standing out, but during an interview, how transparent or how do you gauge, I guess, transparency of a candidate as you're bringing them through the interview process?
Yeah, maybe if I could go back to that previous question. First of all, thank you for asking that question. But I also think it's maybe it's transparency, maybe it's the soft skill of authenticity. Like we are looking for people who are absolutely authentic. And that's where it goes back to, if you know the culture and you truly have, and you know the company and you truly have this affinity for it and this connection, this higher why that you want to be a part of the organization. If you understand your why and why you do what you do and the organization's why, I think that authenticity can really come through. And when it doesn't, most of the time, that person will not get hired. Like just in my experience, when a person comes across that, because of the way that they're answering questions, be it arrogant, fake, right? Like guarded in a way that makes you feel like they're hiding something. that lack of transparency. Yeah, I think it is finding this way of coming across and being authentic and being transparent without oversharing, because there are certainly things in an interview that you don't need to share.
Right. Another question.
Does that make sense, Alan?
It 100% makes sense,
Okay.
and 100% would be what I would anticipate from you, knowing you like I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to gauge soft skills. I mean, it just is. I mean, we go through an interview process that is not hours and hours and hours. It's just not. You know, it's.
So one of the things that we do at Whole Foods that is a little bit different than maybe other companies, I can't say for all companies, I haven't worked at all of them, but our process at Whole Foods, at least for office positions, so that might be in a regional office, it might be in our global support office in Austin. One of the things that we do when we're taking a person through a process, we oftentimes have what we call due diligence conversations. And that is allowing a candidate to speak to multiple people who are going to essentially interact with this person. So it could be their peers. If it's a leader role, it could be their direct reports. It will absolutely be the hiring leader or that person's direct leader, their team leader. It might be peers in the organization. That does give the broader team an opportunity to interact with you on a more personal level outside of a formal interview. And it gives you the opportunity as the candidate to ask questions about the organization. Like, what are the things that you really want to know? It allows you to peel back the onion, and it allows us to get to know you on a bit more individual level beyond just your resume. And when you do come to an interview, if we bring you on site for an interview, it's not the first time you've ever spoken with these people. So you already feel like there's a bit of a connection with the group. And that does feel a little bit more warm than, just coming in, not knowing anyone, spending 45 minutes and then leaving, going about your way.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because I tell people, and I don't know that I should, because I am authentic and I am transparent, but I tell people to try not to get too comfortable. Yeah. You're still in interview mode.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to drop your guard to the degree that, you're saying stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily say in an interview.
Yeah, you should definitely be professional.
Yeah.
I have been in interviews where candidates have used, foul language. Like they definitely took it to a place where it was too comfortable. And then the impression for the hiring team or the panel that they interviewed with was that this person didn't have good discretion. They lacked judgment in knowing this was an interview and they should be professional versus, they took it to a friend level almost. Right. And that's never appropriate in an interview.
Yeah. I'm glad we talked about that too, because I think it's tough to show that you're transparent, authentic, genuine, all of those things without kind of dropping your guard a little bit, but you don't want to drop it too much.
Yeah.
You don't want to drop it completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not best friends. We're still interviewing you for a job kind of deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your thoughts on personality tests like predictive index? Another question from the field.
Yeah, not familiar with predictive index. I will say that there are a few different personality or maybe not just personality, but more psychometric or assessments that we are using in Whole Foods today. Some of them are used at the executive level, like for executive hiring. We do have a process that includes an assessment there. And then for some of our store-based positions, we've actually rolled out just recently an assessment that helps us gauge, like, are you going to be a fit for the type of, not just for the company, but for the type of work, right? So we have different roles in our stores. Some tend to be more team-based, and other roles like a Whole Foods Market shopper who's going and they're picking an order from an online order. They're going and picking each of the items. That tends to be a pretty individual based role. And so we did roll out an assessment to help us gauge, like, is that going to be something that you, Alan, as an individual, as a candidate, are going to be comfortable doing, right? And so we do have some assessments that we're using. I think they have a place. But in terms of the one that was asked about, the predictive index, I'm not familiar with that one. So I can't really speak to that one. We'll say that we don't make a decision based on an assessment alone. It typically is a data point.
Okay. Yeah, and that was going to be my next question for you. Actually, was how much weight do you put to that? But it sounds like it's a data point, and your interpretation or your team's interpretation of that candidate weighs much more heavily than that one data point would.
Yeah, and to be clear, for all the assessments that we're using, we're making sure that they're validated, right? That it's not just something that one person likes the answers to this or not. Like, there actually is quite a bit of work to go into making sure that there's been a thorough job analysis, that you understand what the role is, and you have to interview lots of people who are currently doing the work. You have to interview their leaders. So we use a third-party assessment company to help us do all that work, because we need to make sure that we're not creating any bias in that process in developing an assessment. So we need to make sure that it's a validated assessment if we're going to use one.
Got it. And Julie and Alan, I'll get to your questions in 1 second. We've got a couple more questions there. You talk about the fact that you're doing group interviews or you're having people interview with multiple people. How does a candidate go through that process, and what is your recommendation to folks who are, because there's more and more of that right now, where people are interviewing with multiple individuals within the organization? How do they differentiate but still stay? Because I'm guessing you look for some level of consistency. You know, when you regroup and have conversations with everyone who interviewed, you know, you say, were they consistent in their answers? Did they give? But what ultimately are you looking for out of that way of doing interviews?
Yeah. Yes, the consistency is important. I think it's also like, what is that individual's level of curiosity, right? How did they go about seeking information? Were they joining one of these, due diligence calls and just, answering questions, or were they also really curious and interested in the business? What types of questions did they ask or did they answer? I think it's also an opportunity to say, like, hey, did any red flags come up on any of these calls? Like, was there something that was said that was inappropriate, that came across wrong? Like, there is an opportunity to do that. But for the most part, the due diligence is more about the candidate and helping them feel comfortable coming into our process.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I love that curiosity thing, because we tell people all the time, if you're not asking, I don't care if you interview with 7 people, you have to have questions for all 7.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So
and
Julie,
that goes to knowing the company, knowing the role, and being prepared, right? Like, if you haven't done those things, you're not going to know what questions to ask.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And you can't ever end an interview with, I think you answered all of my questions.
That's not good. That's not good. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on giving candidate feedback about their answers or resume in lieu of the generic, sorry, we selected other candidates? And that's from Julie.
Yeah. To be honest, I think that's really tough in an organization our size. We have 100,000, almost 100,000 team members. And to be honest, we get over 1 million applicants a year. So there's no way to do that for the masses. At the point of you're engaged with a recruiter, I would say that our recruiters on our team are good enough to know if I had something on my resume or, it wasn't clear, I'd say that our recruiters are going to coach the candidate. If they're in the process already, they're going to coach them like, hey, help, maybe you should address this on your resume, or make sure that you talk through this with the hiring leader. You should drive clarity on this particular point. Oh, you've done this, but it's not on your resume. Like, I think that's something you should talk about with a leader. That doesn't happen in the masses. And so unfortunately, we do have the, sorry, we've proceeded with other candidates email, which isn't great. It isn't ideal. It's the only way I know of how to do it for a million applicants with 50 people.
Right.
But when you're engaged in the process, we will give you that type of feedback.
Okay. What if you work for a smaller company? I mean, what would your recommendation be? I mean, knowing the level of talent acquisition that you're at, knowing that the regulations, the federal rules and regulations and laws and everything like that, is it acceptable for a company to reach out and say, look, we found somebody who's a better cultural fit, or we found somebody who just has more of the skills that we were looking for as it relates to this?
Yeah.
What are those parameters that people
I would certainly stay away. I mean, I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
But I have my attorney on speed dial. I think it's one of those things, like, you're probably not going to hear that you weren't a cultural fit. It's like, that's not how we make hiring decisions, right? We make hiring decisions based on who's the most qualified. So that typically is looking at skills, experiences, those things that you've done in your professional career that set you up to do this next role. The hiring team definitely has to see that alignment. They have to be able to weigh both the soft skills as well as the technical skills or the hard skills for a role. Most organizations are going to be advised by their attorney to not provide specific feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not helpful to a candidate. I get that. That's not helpful to a candidate. I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But most attorneys, especially for large organizations, are that opens you up for risk as a company. Right. So if you're a candidate and you're not getting feedback, it's not because the recruiter or the hiring leader doesn't want to give you feedback, most likely.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it is a very difficult balance, and we struggle with it daily. It's just tough.
There are also ways to go about getting feedback and advice and guidance ahead of the process with the company. Use your professional network. Send one of your colleagues that is successful. Like, ask them if they can review your resume for you. Ask them if they can do a mock interview for you. Always be prepared going into an interview. And I think part of that is, like I said, knowing the company, knowing the role. Look at common behavioral based interview questions. That's going to give you an idea of the types of questions that any company is going to ask you. As an individual, it's going to allow you to not be scripted, but to at least know, like, hey, if a question comes up on this topic, I want to go back to this previous experience and use that experience that I had as an example. You're much more likely to be able to recall that if you've thought about it ahead of time rather than on the fly. It never really goes well when an interview asks you a question and you don't have a response.
Yeah.
That just doesn't go well.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many canned questions, there's so many standard questions
that
are asked.
Good prep.
Yeah. Another question that we have from Alan here: how has the hiring process changed at Whole Foods because of COVID-19?
There's a lot there. Probably can't, talk about everything, but in terms of recruiting, I'll be able to share a little bit there for how we're managing recruiting at our global support office. A few months ago, whenever, I guess it was probably early March, whenever COVID really started kicking off, we decided that that point we were no longer going to fly candidates in for interviews, which is definitely a big change for Whole Foods. Like, we typically rely pretty heavily on a face-to-face interview and a panel interview to be able to make hiring decisions. Now, we still had roles that we need to fill, roles that I would argue are business critical. But we decided at that point we're no longer going to fly candidates in. So it definitely made us rethink our process for how do we still engage candidates? How do we help hiring leaders get to know candidates and be able to interview them without necessarily meeting them face-to-face? Also recognizing that for the first time in my professional career, we've actually hired people without ever meeting them and then onboarded them completely remotely for a position that is not a remote position, right? Like, these are positions that at some point in time, I would like to believe are going to be located in an office. But we had to go through this process of no more travel. We started using our virtual interviewing platforms, some that are one that's proprietary, others that, there are virtual interviewing tools and technology out there. So we did start using those. I would say that it took some change management and communication to the broader global support leaders around, hey, here's what you should expect if you're hiring for a position. Here's what you need to expect, that we're not going to do face-to-face interviews. Here's how we're going to conduct these. Here's the type of technology that we're going to use. Here's how the recruiters will screen them ahead of time. That you can do a phone call ahead of time, and then we'll do the virtual interview. So
right.
Certainly required change, and it required change in how my team works and the type of work that my team does. Our recruiting coordinators, we call them recruiting specialists, they used to spend a lot of their time booking travel, managing arrangements with hotels, etc. We're not doing that. And so the work definitely looks different. It's a lot more organizing of virtual interviews and phone screens than on-site travel. So definitely looks different. And in the stores, the same thing. Like, we're not relying on face-to-face interviews at this point. Like there've probably been a few instances where we've still needed to bring an individual on for a face-to-face interview because it's maybe a higher level role in the organization. But with that, we've still made sure that we're managing kind of physical distancing, right? I like to use physical distancing instead of social distancing. We still want to engage with you socially, but physically distancing, face coverings, washing hands, hand sanitizer, that's everywhere. We're not the couple of times that we've done this, the individuals were not placed near each other in a conference room. So a number of things like that we had to put in place.
Okay. Got it. So we've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate, again, the time. I'm trying to,
sure.
The thing that I think I want to circle back to the very beginning of the conversation when you were talking about, just the massive amounts of people that you're getting right now.
Yeah.
And the fact that, be sure you're appropriate for the job that you apply to. People are looking to reskill themselves today. So people are saying, okay, now that I'm unemployed, maybe I should go do this.
Yeah.
I don't know that Whole Foods would hire somebody who hasn't done what you're looking to have done, but maybe you have recommendations for people, no matter, that are looking to reskill themselves and are looking to, kind of change direction.
Sure. So
what
you're
would
right.
That recommendation be?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're an organization that generally runs lean. Like we don't have these massive teams. And so the people that we do have in the role, they really need to be an expert in the work that they're doing. So it is hard to imagine taking a person who's never done something and putting them, if they've never been a buyer or a category manager, I can't imagine that person becoming a buyer or category manager for Whole Foods Market merchandising, right? Like that just is really hard to imagine. I think there's an opportunity to find parallels and connections. If you were a data analyst in a different industry, could you become a data analyst at Whole Foods? Yes. I think you might have to think through, how do you position that? How do you make sure that your resume still comes across as relevant and that the skills are there? In terms of taking a person who's never done the type of job and putting them in that job, I think that's going to be a stretch, Alan, and probably is not going to happen if I'm being honest.
Sure.
I think there are great ways of reskilling yourself, though. There's lots of sites out there that allow you to take advantage of online courses for free. I think like Coursera and a few others are out there that allow you to get, Google has free training that you could take as well on like AdWords or different types of things if that was something that you're interested in. Part of this is you owning your own development as an individual, you owning your career, trying to think about where do you want to go, and then finding what resources are there to help you.
Right.
Some of these might be online tools, online classes that you can take. Some of it might be finding a mentor in your network, right? A person who's already doing this and saying like, hey, I would love to learn, how are you doing this? How can I become a recruiter? Talk to me about like, what do you do as a recruiter? What are the things that I need to know? How can I break into this industry? And for the majority of people, it oftentimes is getting a chance and breaking in. That can be the hardest thing. I think about that not just in industry. I think about going from an individual contributor to a leader as well. Many times to get hired into a leader role, you've had to be a leader previously. So there is this catch-22 of I'm an individual contributor. How do I become a leader? It typically is within the organization that you're already at.
Right.
The other thing is there may be a chance to break into an industry if you've not done it before, but maybe it's taking a step back to progress your career forward, right? Like I tend not to think about career as a ladder, but more as a web, right? Sometimes you are going up, and then you want to get into another area of the business. So I for example, I'm in team member services or HR. I'm a vice president in this area, but I'm not going to go be a vice president in merchandising. I've never done merchandising before. So maybe I would take a couple steps back if I wanted to get into merchandising, leveraging the strengths of building teams and being innovative and building relationships could potentially get me in the door, but I'm not going to go over as a vice president. And so for some of your listeners, Alan, I think there may be just a need to kind of think through that of my career isn't necessarily a vertical ladder, but how can it be a web, and how can I potentially leverage my skills to get into a new industry? I think there's also, how do you leverage your network groups? So maybe it's your professional industry associations, maybe it's your alma mater, maybe it's you were an alumni of a certain organization. How can you connect with people in that, in one of those areas who can help you propel your career forward as well?
Right. No, that's great. That's great advice. And I think, going back to something else that you said, when people do the research and reach out to you on LinkedIn, for a job that they know they're qualified for, what if they're looking to make that change from non-leadership to leadership? Would you also be accepting, or do you think people could, ultimately craft an email to reach out to people saying, hey, I'm here, I want to be here, you've done that? Is there, would you say, Ray, that you would be open, yourself personally, to that? And if people craft it the right way, they probably get more accepting than declining, I guess, of that sort of question, if they were to reach out to people and say, look, I'm looking to do this, and it looks like you've done it.
I'm still not sure. I still think it may be a challenge. I think some of the things that you can do to overcome that challenge is, how have you led informally, right? So maybe you haven't been a leader in the workplace, but where have you been a leader? And how can you maybe bring that leadership skill, leadership experience into your resume? Find opportunities to volunteer and be a leader in a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
There are other ways of gaining leadership. How have you led peers in your organization, right? So thinking about that, sometimes it's actually more challenging to be a leader when you don't have the authority of being a leader. So how can you bring in some of those experiences as well, right? Like how you led peers, how you led informally in the organization. All of that potentially could strengthen your position as a candidate to be considered for a leader role. Although as a hiring manager, if I'm looking for a leader, I typically am looking for a person who's been a leader previously.
Who's led. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. So I will field this question first, and I'll let you think about it if you want it.
What's the next question? I'll see it.
It's, do you have any advice for older tech workers, someone that is in their early 60s? And this is definitely a question that I'm seeing more often these days than I think I've ever seen. And what I would say is it's tough. I mean, it's a difficult scenario for sure, because I think companies it's kind of a catch-22, to use the phrase that you just threw out, Ray. I think companies are looking for people who will stay, and they want people who are going to give them tenure, which the millennial generation, or whatever generation you want to, label as not being as interested in tenure as other generations maybe were. But by the same token, they want, somebody who maybe has more innovative thoughts and comes from a diverse set of industries and comes from, a lot of different backgrounds and experiences. So it's tough on both sides, because as I put people to work who are, in their 20s, I know they're not going to stick. When I put people to work who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, chances are pretty good they're looking for a longer term career. Not to put that blanket on that generation, but it's finding the right company, and those companies exist, but it's tough on either end of the spectrum. Whether you're 20 and you're looked at as, I'm only going to be here for 9 months and then I'm going to go to the next best thing, or you're in your 60s and you're looked at as, well, that individual is going to retire here and I'm not going to have them beyond the next 5 years. It's tough on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a great answer for this, to be honest. I think there is a diverse perspective that a person would bring that would actually add a lot of value to the organization. My advice would be, recruiters are not looking at age. They typically can't see age. What they can see is your resume. And so, is your resume relevant? If you're, are you current on modern technologies, right? Like, to me, if you're in the tech industry, that's going to be super important. That's going to be most relevant is, are you going to be able to add value? Do you know this coding language? If you're in engineering, like, that's really important. are you going to be able to bring a diverse perspective? Are you going to help drive innovation in tech? And I think anybody can do that at any age, right? I don't think age is a limiting factor unless you put it on yourself.
Yeah, it's certainly a question that comes up a lot, and it's a tough one to answer because it is a limiting factor that people put on themselves, but it's also a limiting factor that others have put on them. And I hate to say that, but it's the case, unfortunately. And having said that, I think the tenure question is a good question to end with as well. Whole Foods has a significant amount of tenure. We have people on this call that I know have 20 plus years tenure in one company. How does Whole Foods view it? I mean, being part of Amazon, being part of a, innovative technology driven company, is there something to be said for a resume that shows 20 plus years of tenure versus one that shows 18 months to 2.5 years at one place, 18 months to 2.5 years at another place, et cetera?
Yeah, I would definitely say that Whole Foods values tenure. Like a lot of our systems that are in place today actually recognize and reward individuals based on how long they've been with the company, right? So in our current setup, like you might pay less for your insurance premiums based on tenure. Like that's very different than any other place that I've ever seen. But the systems have been designed at Whole Foods to reward a person who's going to be loyal to the company and stay with the company. So I definitely think there's that. And we have a ton of individuals that have been with the company for, years, right? So there's probably more tenure in the room in most meetings than I go to than I have with the company.
Nice.
I'm typically one of those individuals that are like, oh, you're the new guy.
Still a rookie.
Yeah, still a rookie. So there's absolutely, that aspect. The only time it's ever come up for me around tenures, like it tend to be looking at resumes for more senior positions with people being in these roles for a year and, getting feedback that person looks like they've job hopped a lot. And you don't expect that at senior levels in an organization. So I think at that point it becomes a limiting factor for a person potentially. I don't know. I think when I look at resumes, I do see a lot of people who've been with a company 2-3 years. That does tend to be common. But if you start seeing, they were with a company, 6 months and then 10 months and then another one for, months, it certainly just makes me ask questions about it, right? It makes me want to dig and I'm curious around why. Some cases there could be really good reasons. It could be that they had to relocate, life situations occur. There may be good reasons for that, but for the most part, tenure goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about that a few weeks ago. When people get offended by you asking why you moved around a lot, that doesn't show up well either. I can't believe you would ask me why I've only been here 6 months. That's what people do these days. No, not really.
Yeah.
It's what you did. That's not what everybody does. Excellent. Well, Ray, I can't thank you enough, man. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
I'm grateful that you were here. Like I said, we record this. So if anyone wants to access it later or forward it along, please do. We'll post it on LinkedIn and I'll tag Ray in it so that you can share it with your network too. But I really appreciate it, my friend. Thank you.
Alan, have a good day. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ray.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.